Hello nerds, and welcome to this last installment of our post-AP exam global notes to prepare you for the June Global Regents exam. This section should go fairly fast because we have covered a good deal of it in our AP Euro notes, but it can never be harmful to review nonetheless. So this section is going to cover South Asia from about 1750 to approximately the present. And of course, South Asia, what we're going to mostly talk about is India, but we're also going to talk about Pakistan and the development of Bangladesh as well. All right. So first, again, this is going to be a review from AP Euro. You got to know the progression of European influence and then control over the Indian subcontinent. So we got to start back with the British East India Company, which was a joint stock company, which starts establishing its interest in South Asia and East Asia as well, starting around the 17th century. And basically, what the British East India Company is doing is making agreements with Mughal rulers, and additionally kind of gradually reducing their land. There's actually some laws the British East India Company passed in India that basically said when an emperor or a prince of one of the independent states in India dies, it automatically becomes British land. So basically, it's a gradual shift of British control over India. Significant change is going to be the 7 Years' War, because the French also had interest in controlling India, and the 7 Years' War being an international, or really a world war as it was, there was fighting between the British and the French for control over South Asia. Long story short, Britain wins, and Britain becomes the dominant European power in India. So at that point, from basically 1763, Britain effectively has a trade monopoly over India. All right, it's a bunch of central questions. All right, Sepoy Mutiny, the Sepoy Revolt, we've already covered in AP Euro, but make sure you understand the Sepoy Revolt as an example of native resistance towards European colonialism. I've often seen global exam questions that I like to compare, like something like, what does the Sepoy Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion in China have in common? And the answer every single time is something about resistance towards colonialism. So the Sepoy Revolt, the long-term causes is going to be just like continued resentment over British East India Company's control over India. The short term is when the British East India Company armed their Sepoy soldiers. Remember, Sepoys were Indian soldiers working for the British East India Company with new rifles, and these new rifles used a different form of lubrication that usually used animal fat, either pig or cow, and both of those animals are against the religions for both Islam and Hinduism, and that is the spark of the revolt, and it basically is a large-scale revolt that taking up hundreds of thousands of people will be involved. The British are going to send in more soldiers, eventually crush the revolt, and the key takeaway, there's really two of them. One, India officially becomes a colony of Britain, so the British government, the Crown, actually takes direct control over India. So it's not the British East India Company anymore, it's now the British Crown. So the British called India the British Raj, which is rule in Hindi. Additionally, the other impact is on the Indian side. It's going to really increase the amount of resentment that Indians have towards British control of their country, and eventually we're going to see the founding of a nationalist political party called the Indian National Congress. Okay, next, we've already covered this briefly in AP Euro about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago now. The Amritsar Massacre, just know it as an example of the atrocities of the British Empire in India. So this is just after World War I. The British passed a new law that said Indians cannot gather in like groups of 10 or larger. Basically, they're attempting to crush any forms of protest in India. So in this case, this is a peaceful protest of hundreds of Indians, and the major town square in the region of the town called Amritsar, in the region of Punjab, which was largely a Sikh region. And the British General Dyer, calls in the troops because it is a large protest, but it is a very peaceful protest nonetheless. And he gives the orders to his Sepoy soldiers to fire on the unarmed crowd, and they kill at least 350 people, injuring over 1,000 more. They actually bring General Dyer to like a hearing, and they asked him, like, would you bring in a machine gun if you could have? And he said, absolutely, yes. Just a pretty awful person. Unfortunately, he does not have any severe repercussions brought against him. He basically is just given another job in the British Army back in the UK. Regardless, what do we look for in the Global Regents exam? It's just an example to know of increasing the Indian resentment towards British rule of their country, increasing Indian nationalism. That's generally how this topic comes up on the exam. All right, so I've already been mentioning growth of Indian nationalism quite a bit, so this is just getting to a little bit more detail. So what's the underlying cause of it? It's of course going to be British ethnocentrism. Remember, ethnocentrism, vocab word from Global 1, which says you believe your ethnic group is superior to another one. So in India, the British Empire effectively created a form of segregation. There was like a European-only sections of restaurants, Indian-only. In their trains, they were segregated. So effectively, Indians are treated as third-class citizens in their own country. In Indian schools, Britain is effectively trying to force a Western education on them, which could be interpreted as potential cultural genocide in some ways. And then you add in the Sepoy Revolt, you add in the Amritsar Massacre, you're now getting both those long-term and short-term impacts of nationalism, eventually provoking political parties like this. Two major political parties to know in the the timeline of Indian independence. First one is the Indian National Congress, with a very simple goal of winning Indian independence from the British Empire. And its initial leader is going to be Nehru, but eventually be led by Gandhi. Then you have the Muslim League, which also has the same goal as the Indian National Congress, which is independence from the British Empire, but also adds in the issue with religion. So in the British Raj, there are two very major religions, which is Islam and Hinduism. Hinduism being the majority, Islam had approximately 30% of the population, which is a very significant minority. And the Muslims feared that after independence, the Hindus would control the major governmental positions and potentially create another form of segregation later on. So the leader of that group was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who will eventually be the first leader of an independent Pakistan. All right. All right, Gandhi, we already covered in AP Euro, so just make sure you know Gandhi's major examples of civil disobedience, nonviolent protests, which sometimes is called passive resistance, although Gandhi never liked that term. He says it was always active resistance. In Hindi, it's called satyagraha. And basically, the major ones to know, we're going to have the homespun movement. So the British Empire required Indians to purchase cloth made in Britain from British merchants. And Gandhi said, well, first, burn your British cloth, and second, make your own clothes using traditional techniques, using those hand looms, so going old school. And so he's hurting Britain really where it hurts, and that's in the wallet. Salt March, a similar idea. Britain had a monopoly over the salt in India. Basically, you can only purchase salt from British merchants. You couldn't even go to the seaside and make it your own. That's technically breaking the law. So what does Gandhi do? He marches almost 300 miles to the seaside with tens of thousands of followers to harvest salt right on the coast, right on the beaches. Technically, that's illegal. They get arrested, but that's all part of the process. So the British arrest tens of thousands of protesters. They actually overfilled their jails. And again, these movements were generally publicized. Gandhi had a really good friend who worked for the New York Times. And he's the one sending this information back to New York City. It's being published in the New York Times. So Gandhi was very strategic with how he was spreading his movement. It's not just involving Indian protests. He wanted the international community to also protest the British Empire as well. So beyond that, Gandhi quickly recognized that once India becomes independent, that hostility between Hindus and Muslims is going to create another conflict. So he was continually trying to quell tension between the Muslim League and his Indian National Congress. And his own Indian National Congress had significant, more radical wings that did not want to share power with Muslims after independence. Additionally, on a more domestic note, Gandhi, even though he was a member of the Brahmin caste, the highest in the Indian caste system, he called for essentially the equal treatment of untouchables. And actually, once India becomes officially independent, they will technically outlaw at least the political importance of the caste system, although it will still be used, especially in the more rural parts of India. All right, just a bunch of video clips. We've actually watched a few in class already. All right, so during World War II, the Indian National Congress actually kind of, not repressed, but they kind of reduced their amount of protests because Britain is fighting Nazi Germany. It doesn't say that they stopped the protests. They definitely had some. They just reduced them. Most importantly, one of those movements was called the Quit India movement. And basically, it was just additional pressure on the British government, but the British government responded with considerable force. They arrested pretty much the entire leadership of the Indian National Congress. Gandhi was in prison for most of World War II. So basically what the British government is saying is you have to wait until World War II is finished, then we will deal with potential talks about independence. Which leads us to Indian independence. 1947, one of the first major colonies to gain its independence from a European colonial power. So we already talked about the why in AP Euro on why Europeans are going to start giving up their colonies. It's a combination of resistance from nationalist organizations like the Indian National Congress, and additionally, internal issues. Money problems. It actually became more expensive to administer a colony than what you were getting out of it. So, 1947, India is officially an independent country, and Nehru will be its first prime minister, who you just saw. So, a significant event occurs right after the independence is declared. It's called the Partition of India. So, on this map, remember, the British Raj was not just India. It was modern-day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, which the British called Burma at that point. So when they created the independent country, they could not address, at least successfully address, the tensions between the Muslim League and the Indian National Congress. So they agreed to partition the subcontinent into different countries. So India being largely a Hindu country and West and East Pakistan being largely Muslim countries. So the issue is you had some religions caught on the wrong side, and that created a huge migration crisis and refugee crisis. It's actually considered the largest migration in human history. But it was also creating significant amounts of violence. So in cities in India and Pakistan, sections are erupting in violence, and over 1 million people are killed during this 1 to 2 year process of moving between the two sides. So, as you can see, the East and West Pakistan will eventually just be called Pakistan, and East Pakistan we'll get to very shortly, which will eventually become Bangladesh. So, Gandhi never became prime minister. He was getting fairly old at that point anyways, but he does get assassinated in 1948. A very radical Hindu is one who shot him. He basically was upset with Gandhi trying to promote good relations between Hindus and Muslims, and he was murdered for it in 1948. All right. Skip. All right, India after independence. So the type of government they have is a parliamentary democracy. It still is today. So they have a prime minister. They don't have a president. And know that Nehru becomes its longest serving prime minister. He's not alive today, but he's still considered the longest serving prime minister. And they officially ban discrimination based on the caste, but India is a massive country, especially being mostly rural. Generally speaking, rural areas are more conservative than cities, and the caste system still plays a significant role in marriage and whatnot, especially in the more rural parts. Migrations already covered. Let's keep going here. Non-alignment. This occasionally comes up. We already covered in AP Euro. Just know that the leaders of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War would be India, Yugoslavia, and Ghana. Okay, this doesn't come up too much on the Regents exam. It's just good to know as a person about just like hot spots in the world where there is continued conflict today in 2022. So Kashmir is a disputed region in northern India here. Basically, both Pakistan and India claim it as their own territory, and there's been a series of war and battles fought between India and Pakistan over this area called Kashmir. All right, Sikhs. So his Sikhs are a minority religion in the northern part of India, and Sikhism is a form of a monotheistic religion, although there's a lot of parts of Hinduism involved in it as well. And basically, the Sikhs have historically wanted more and more autonomy, and the Indian government since independence has generally been not favorable towards giving the Sikhs more autonomy. A significant event, 1984 and 1986, the Indian army stormed Sikh temples, killing quite a few people. And actually, the first time this happened, this is actually what got the prime minister at the time. Her name was Indira Gandhi. Please don't confuse her with the daughter of Gandhi, because she wasn't. She was actually the daughter of Nehru, and she's the second longest serving prime minister in Indian history. She was actually assassinated by two of her own bodyguards because of her cracking down on the Sikhs. Both of her bodyguards were Sikh nationalists. All right, Indira Gandhi, who I just mentioned, daughter of Nehru, elected 4 times, and generally speaking, her premiership was marked with economic issues, political instability because of a series of wars with Pakistan, her issue, the issue with Sikhs. So overall, it was a bit of an unstable time when she was prime minister, and eventually gets assassinated by Sikh nationalists. Her funeral pyre. And as you can tell, assassinations have been, sadly, a little bit common in Indian history, at least for political leaders, significant political leaders at least. All right, got a new term here. So every so often, the Regents exam asks a question about the Green Revolution. So the Green Revolution overall, in other parts of the world, especially like the United States, actually starts at like the 1920s-ish, somewhere in that ballpark, and it kind of continues past World War II. Essentially, if you see the term Green Revolution, it is just a term where we're seeing yet another agricultural revolution in history. Like, think back to Global One, the first agricultural revolution, the Neolithic Revolution. Then we talked about the 18th century agricultural revolution in Britain. Then here we have the Green Revolutions. So it's basically just making food production more efficient, and generally speaking, that was the result of new technology, especially the use of chemical fertilizers, which will obviously have an impact on climate change later on. But India is going to have their own form of a green revolution in the 60s and 70s because they generally were looking for ways to feed their population. That being said, they are still not quite there with being able to feed their entire population. All right, current issues in India. I've already covered a bunch of the Sikh nationalism. A major one's going to be the skyrocketing birth rate. India currently is the second most populous country in the world after China, but India will surpass China as the most populated country on Earth, probably the next 15 years or so, as I'm recording this in 2022. Additionally, because it's overpopulation, especially how packed in the cities are, we see significant pollution in their cities from cars. And additionally, remember the Regents exam has this idea called enduring issues. You have to write enduring issues essay. And one of these enduring issues overall on the course is this conflict between traditionalism and modernism. So, for example, the idea of traditional culture in India is the persistence of the caste system, which still can influence marriages, arranged marriages, what have you. And then you have urbanization, when often when you get to cities, they become a little bit more liberal and often a little more westernization because of the British colonization. So it's that constant conflict between traditional culture and modern culture. Other than that, note the importance of technology in India. By the 1990s, the Western companies were locating a lot of their businesses in India. It still is currently happening today. Consistent disputes with Pakistan. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers, who also are going through varying degrees of tension, and we know the issue in Kashmir. So having two countries, nuclear countries, right next to each other that have had tension is not great for the future stability. Oops, sorry about that. A little technical difficulties. Here we go. Back at it. All right. Creation of Bangladesh. So initially, we know we have West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and East Pakistan declares independence from West Pakistan. Why? Because they are different ethnic groups, Bengalis. And when this happens, East Pakistan officially becomes Bangladesh, and West Pakistan simply takes the name Pakistan. So since then, Bangladesh is a country that's experienced significant amounts of poverty, and a lot of it is related to the textile industry. So if you like, whatever clothes you're currently wearing, check the tags, see if you have anything made in Bangladesh. It is a country where it has some of the cheapest labor rates on earth. I was just watching a video about the textile industry there, and on average, a worker in the garment industry makes approximately $80 per month. So the significance of that is pretty extravagant. The fast fashion industry effectively preys off of cheap labor from countries like Bangladesh, like Haiti. So that can absolutely lead to human rights violations, especially with there's actually a significant collapse of a factory in Bangladesh that killed hundreds of people fairly recently, actually. So that would be probably an enduring issue, is talking about human rights violations, in this case directly connected to the fashion industry. Right, so we got current issues in Pakistan. So Pakistan doesn't come up too much on, at least separate from India. More or less, I would just note for the continued disputes and tension with India. Additionally, Pakistan is whoever is in Prime Minister of Pakistan generally has really good relations with the military. The military has significant amounts of power in Pakistan. So just knowing that relationship with the military having a significant amount of control over the Pakistani government, and pretty good. More recently, and by more recently I mean last 20-something years, Pakistan and the United States have gone through periods of a lot of mutual distrust over the war on terror. In some cases, Al-Qaeda would often go to Pakistan to elude United States special forces when trying to pursue them. So it's kind of like this back and forth between the U.S. military and Pakistan over the targeting of terrorists. Now, that being said, it's significantly changed now that Afghanistan is officially in the Taliban's hands. The United States is not there anymore. All right, nerds, that is it for the global notes. I'd recommend going through these global notes at least one more time to get more secure with the content. Other than that, continue doing practice Regents and multiple choice questions. All of the former Regents exams are on the New York State website. Just give it a Google. There's no harm in doing old ones, even though it's a slightly different exam now. And from here in class, we'll be doing quite a bit of enduring issues work, so you're comfortable with the new essay. Other than that, we're done. Prakash out.